Ever catch yourself thinking, I can just Google that later, and then like your brain kind of checks out? Does having all the info at our fingertips, does it actually change how we process it?
That's a good question.
Today we're diving into some research that looks at this. It specifically looks at investors, but what they find, get this, it applies to way more than just Wall Street. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. It really does apply more broadly. We're looking at a 2024 study, and it was published in Contemporary Accounting Research. And they did something really interesting. They ran not one, not two, but 3 separate experiments.
Okay, 3 experiments, that's how you get the good stuff, right?
That's how you get the good stuff. That's how you figure out what's really going on.
So what were they testing? Give us the need to know before we jump into the nitty-gritty.
So, in a nutshell, they wanted to find out if the perception of easily finding information online, so thank you, Google, if that actually changes how investors evaluate a company.
Okay.
So do they get so fixated on these easily Googleable data points that they completely miss the bigger picture? Kind of like, being handed a treasure map, but only focusing on where the X marks the spot and forgetting to actually look for the treasure.
So, okay, I'm hooked. Now, they kept mentioning earnings fixation, though, and I gotta say, I don't know, not everyone listening is like, a finance whiz, what is that exactly?
Right. Good point. It's actually a very intuitive concept, though. Imagine this. You're buying a car, but you only look at the price tag.
Okay.
You don't consider the mileage, the safety ratings, the features.
Right.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what earnings fixation is. It's when investors only focus on a company's stated profit, like did they make money or not? And they don't dig into those underlying factors that actually contribute to that number.
Okay, so like looking beyond the surface level, I got it. Tell me about this first experiment. How do they test this out?
So they use this platform. It's called Amazon Mechanical Turk. Basically, they got a whole bunch of everyday people to act as investors.
Okay.
Think of it as like a way to get a snapshot of how regular internet users like you and me might approach this type of thing.
Makes sense, yeah. So there are these everyday people, they're playing investor. What do they do?
Here's where it gets interesting, right? So they split these folks into 2 groups. Group number 1, they're allowed to use Google, right? Look up the financial information about this fictional biotech company they created. And this was meant to kind of, mimic how a lot of us might research companies today. Then you have group number 2. They're given the exact same financial data.
Okay.
But it was given to them directly. No searching required.
Interesting. So it's almost like simulating that feeling of, oh, I could find this information anytime versus like having it right in front of you. What happened next?
Okay, so they get even more cunning, right? Within each of these groups, they show some people a company with really healthy financials. Growing revenue, they were investing in R&D, good stuff. And then other people saw this company that on paper looked a bit, shakier. But, and this is key, both companies had the exact same net income.
Oh, wow.
Meaning, on the surface, they had made the same profit.
Oh, that's brilliant. So they're really testing if people are just getting like distracted by that one easy to find number, that earnings number, even if the other stuff tells, a different story.
You got it.
So what happened? What were the results?
The people who had to Google the information, they basically couldn't tell the healthy company from the less healthy company. They got so stuck on that final earnings number that they didn't dig any deeper.
Wow. That's kind of alarming, right? Like, it's almost like we're being primed to just skim for that easy answer.
It is alarming.
What about the group that didn't have to search?
That's where it gets really interesting. This group, they were much better at being able to spot the differences between the 2 companies. They were able to recognize that the company that was investing in R&D, putting money back into developing new products, new innovations, that was actually the stronger choice, even though both companies had that same bottom line profit number.
It really is. It's like you're so used to having a restaurant menu memorized because it's always online, but then you get there and you barely even look at it. You just order like the same thing.
Right.
And what seemed like, oh, I'm saving time, maybe it's actually making us like less discerning overall.
You're exactly right. And you know what? This isn't just an anecdote. This is actually reflected in how these participants explain their own reasoning. So the search engine group, they mostly talked about that final profit number. That's all they cared about. But then the other group, the group that was given the information directly, they talked about all sorts of details from that financial statement.
Interesting.
Showing a much deeper level of engagement with the material. And here's the other thing. They actually ran a whole separate experiment. right? To make sure it wasn't just about Google specifically.
Really? How do you test the Google effect without Google?
Exactly right. So this time, they just told people, hey, this information about this company, it'll be easy to find again later if you need it.
Okay.
So they use the same setup, right? With the healthy company versus the less healthy company. Again, both having identical earnings, but different underlying factors.
So no searching, but it's almost like they planted that seed. Like, oh yeah, if I need it, it's out there.
Exactly. It's just that perception. And guess what? Same results. Even without having to lift a finger to search, the people who believed that the information was readily available, they showed that same earnings fixation.
Yeah.
They were way more focused on that one number, that earnings number. And they undervalued the company with the stronger financials.
Okay, so now that is kind of blowing my mind because it's not even like the act of searching. It's just that feeling like, oh, if I need it, it's just a click away, which, let's be honest, that's kind of how we treat a lot of information these days.
All the time, right?
Yeah.
And that brings us to experiment number 3.
Okay.
This time they wanted to know, okay, if we're not deeply encoding this information because we assume that we can look it up again later, what does that do to our memory?
Okay, this is where it gets real. Like, you know that feeling when you're reading an article and you're like, oh, I can just Google this later?
Yep.
And then your brain just kind of like
Accept.
moves on. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. We all do it.
Yeah.
So in this final experiment, they showed participants that less healthy companies' financial statement, the one with those kind of hidden strengths, and then they gave them a surprise memory test.
Oh, man. Pop quiz?
Right.
So the people who used Google, they like remember the details better, right?
Nope. The opposite. The ones who had Googled the information earlier, they actually remembered significantly less about that company's financials than those who had just been given the information directly.
So this isn't just about like picking stocks, right? I mean, this is about how our brains are processing any information that we think is like readily available.
100%. And I think this study, used financial statements, which is interesting, but the implications here, they're much broader. Think about how we consume news, how we read articles, even how we approach like a dense work report. Are we truly like engaging with material, or are we just subconsciously relying on that Google safety net?
That's a really good question. That's something, yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that. But if just knowing that the information is out there can make us like more superficial readers, what does that even mean in the long run? Like, are our brains being like rewired for this kind of shallow processing?
It's like what happens to our muscles if we stop exercising, right? If we don't challenge our brains to really grapple with complexity, to retain information, to make connections, do those cognitive muscles just sort of like weaken over time?
Yeah, it's like choosing to take the stairs instead of just hopping on that escalator.
Right.
Like our brains might thank us in the long run for that little bit of extra effort.
I think so, yeah. It's about being mindful of those mental habits that we're forming. And, again, it's not about saying get rid of Google. Google's an incredible tool.
Right.
But if we are constantly just defaulting to the easiest path to those like quick hits of information, are we missing out on like the richness of deeper engagement?
It makes you wonder, like, what incredible insights, what aha moments, what connections are we missing out on when we just let our brain off the hook?
That is the question.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I find so compelling about this research. It's a bit of a wake-up call, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Right.
If anything, it's empowering.
Yeah.
We actually have the ability to choose how we engage with information, how we strengthen those cognitive muscles.
So what's your advice? Like, if we want to be more mindful consumers of information, where do we even start?
Think about it like, training for a marathon.
Okay.
You don't just jump into running 26 miles.
Right.
You have to start small, build up that endurance, vary your routine a little bit, and it's kind of the same with our brains, right?
I like that. I like that analogy. So what's our like mental equivalent of stretching before the run? Like, how do we start building those like good brain habits?
Yeah. So next time you're about to dive into a new topic,
Yeah.
What if instead of immediately Googling it, you resisted that urge?
Yeah.
Maybe you crack open a book. Maybe you seek out a long-form article. Or, even just have a conversation with someone who's knowledgeable on the topic.
Right, that human connection. I feel like sometimes like the best insights come from just like actually talking to another human being, not just reading what they wrote on the internet.
100%. And even when you do find yourself going down those Google rabbit holes, right? Just kind of ask yourself, like, am I truly absorbing this information? Or am I just skimming for the highlights? And And if it's the latter, maybe it's time to step away, choose a different source, or just hit pause and refocus.
You know, this whole conversation, it reminds me of that saying, the faintest ink is better than the best memory. But what if, like, we're so reliant on digital ink that our memory for, like, the really important stuff, it just starts to fade?
Right. It makes you wonder. And that's something I hope each of you listening will kind of continue to think about. How can we harness the incredible power of technology without outsourcing our critical thinking, our curiosity, our ability to really engage deeply with the world around us? And, it's not an easy answer.
Right.
But the journey of trying to figure that out, that might be the most rewarding search of all.
I love that. Well, this has been quite the deep dive, wouldn't you say?
It has.
We started with investors and, how they interact with easily accessible information. But it turns out what we've uncovered, it really does apply to all of us, no matter how we engage with, the world of knowledge.
And that's the point, right?
Yeah.
To keep asking these questions, keep challenging our assumptions, and to just keep learning and growing, even when the answers aren't a click away.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for diving in with us today. Until next time, keep those brains engaged.